All right. Okay. Thank you for your patience here as I get started. I think that that's going to be good. So one of the things I wanted to do, I haven't done a lot of these kind of video things just because I don't feel like I do very good on video, but I always get a little self-conscious about it. But this is something that I needed to actually talk about because putting it into words, there's just so much here that I just really wanted to talk and put some things out there that I think will be a help. So the largest thing I've just beginning before we get in and get into this too much, I want to comment that I have a great deal of respect for John MacArthur and his ministry of the gospel. Some of the clearest presentations of the gospel I've ever seen in public on television have been done by Pastor John. But we can recognize problems. In fact, we must recognize them, even and especially in our own midst. First, we got to take the beam out of our own eye before dealing with the speck in someone else's eye. And so we really need to deal with this in-house and not wait for those who might be out of the house to call us to account. And so there is an accounting that is needed. And you've heard the old saying, beauty is as beauty does. If you want, you could change that and say the gospel is as the gospel lives. And one of the problems that we've got in terms of the church is the way we handle abuse undermines the gospel. And there are some lessons in this issue that has come up that are really useful for the church, really useful for us to consider, and then to look at how do we avoid this as churches, as pastors. I'm coming to you from my office at our church. And as a pastor, this is a near and dear to my heart topic. We have to do better as churches. We have to. And so Psalm 82 Initiative was set up and established simply to help pastors and churches recognize and respond to abuse effectively. We came about this because we started helping on behind the scenes, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And it became very clear to us that something bigger needed to be done than simply helping out those victims, but instead to actually take the time to look at how can churches improve in our recognizing and handling abuse. And then what are some pitfalls? I've got to do a shout out to Julie Royce really quick here, because her investigative reporting has been excellent on this, and the documentation is there. And so we can actually look at it, deal with it, and we can deal with it from a factual basis. So what I'm going to be doing is looking at the words of two pastors. So we're calling the series The Tale of Two Pastors. And we're going to be looking at this from the perspective of how can this be avoided, and how can these kinds of deceptions not happen, and how can the church be less susceptible to this and this kind of thing. So the first pastor that we're going to look at is Pastor Carey Hardy. And so I want to read to you a letter that was a declaration put into the public record of this case by a associate pastor at Grace Church. I want to comment about that. One of the things about having a very large church is that you're going to trust your associates. You're going to have to trust your staff. And so I'm not going to focus on John MacArthur, because I believe that the primary error that it looks like to me is trusting Pastor Hardy, because Pastor Hardy seems to be the fountainhead of the opinions that Grace Church is following. However, with that said, the letters that were sent to Eileen Gray in this did come from the elders as a group. And I do believe that because of that, the elders of Grace Church do have a responsibility to own this as a church and as leaders. So I don't believe they are guiltless, but I really want to focus in from a pastoral perspective and from a church perspective, what went wrong. And I think we can learn a bunch of things from this. And so here's part of Carrie Hardy's declaration. I am an associate pastor at Grace Church and have counseled with both David and Eileen Gray concerning their parenting and marriage issues, as I have done with numerous other couples in our church over the years. The facts set forth herein are true, and of my own personal knowledge, if called upon to testify, I could and would competently testify to the matters stated herein. One of the things when you're writing for the court that's important is to speak without hearsay. And I don't believe that the letter that Pastor Hardy has written here actually meets that. And there's a good bit of things that appear to be his taking David's word for the matter and not actually responding based upon his own personal observations. He also does not give much in the way of argumentation why he came to the conclusions he came to. And I find that to be concerning and a general lack of professionalism in providing an opinion to the court. So when I read this, there's a bunch of ambiguity, and I would like to see maybe a little bit more explanation of methodology and that kind of thing. Is one of the reasons is pastors, sometimes we are very careless in how we handle matters that come to our attention and that we're going to be dealing with. And this general lack of care in terms of our own observation and our own conclusions, our own discernment, the first primary problem that we have is that we tend to trust our own judgment far too quickly and far too much. And you can see that even in the methodology that's being used. He continues, I have known David and Eileen Gray somewhat for several years and have been intimately involved in their present situation for almost a year. For the reasons set forth below, I'm of the opinion that Eileen simply doesn't like David, believes she's both happier and healthier without him around, and is using what she alleges to have happened with the children as leverage to put David out of their lives. This opinion is bolstered by Eileen's admission that she has a tendency to exaggerate, and also that she had been untruthful in connection with her application with the church for a position as a missionary. Wow, there's just so much here in this that is concerning. You see a conclusion that's been drawn. Eileen doesn't like David. Well, I don't know very many victims being mistreated who find themselves liking their abuser. That does not seem unreasonable for someone to be dealing with abuse. Believes she's both happier and healthier without him around. I don't know a victim that isn't happier and healthier without their abuser around. So those two conclusions are exactly true. The real problem is that he doesn't believe what Eileen has reported regarding David. He calls it alleges. Now, we find out later on in the story that he's actually written a confession. And some of the things in that written confession are disturbing. We'll talk about that later. But from what it sounds like, Pastor Hardy was not interested in even reviewing what David had written about his own assessment of his own behavior in the marriage. When someone tells you and makes a confession of abuse, it is rarely exaggerated. It is possible that someone, in an effort to simply get their own way, is going to exaggerate and make things up. That's entirely possible. It actually is far less likely than what most people think. In fact, when someone says, hey, my kids are being abused, you should pay attention because it's probably true. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be exactly true and probably is going to be less than the truth, not more than. The one thing that's interesting that someone reading this report might say is that his opinion that she's just using this as an opportunity to get rid of her husband is his opinion is bolstered by what he says, Eileen's admission that she has a tendency to exaggerate. And I can, in my mind, hear how this has happened. I can almost hear it. You know, have you ever exaggerated? Have you ever done this? Is that really what he did? Are you using inflammatory language? A certain line of questioning can actually serve to corner someone, especially someone who's been under gaslighting, who's been under a deep manipulation, to actually corner them in a way that they go, well, yeah, I guess, you know, when I was 14, I always tended to exaggerate. So I guess this might be that. When you actually read this, you find out that's not actually what's happening, but that what he's actually done is he has come into the situation with a belief, and he is fitting everything to that belief. He's come into the situation with the general belief that David is a good person who just needs to be loved back into goodness. And so with that belief, he must find a reason why Eileen's complaint is not as serious as he wants. This is the problem with judgment, and our personal judgment is we come up to a confirmation bias. When we start with an assumption, we don't have the humility to check those assumptions by our questions. Instead, we tend to ask questions that produce the answer we expect. And a lack of discipline in the way we ask questions can actually serve to confirm an erroneous opinion in our own mind. Once that opinion is there, she's an exaggerator, and now she's a liar. That's the next thing that he says. She was untruthful with their application to the church for a position as a missionary. Now, we find out some other things about this that are mitigating factors later on as we read and get in further. But what's happened here is he's glossed over a couple really important things. It is not uncommon for victims to lie and present their situation as better than it is. And there's several reasons why this might be true. The first reason it might be true is because that's the safest thing, because you have to live according to the abuser's lie. If you don't live according to the abuser's lie, your life gets much more difficult and much harder, much more dangerous. And so living according to the abuser's lie is safest. Well, the other reasons that we might find that this is true is sometimes a victim can be deceived. They can think this is normal. This is the way it's supposed to be. My mistreatment is just the way everybody is. And that lie that they've believed that this isn't horrible, this isn't bad, they're just simply repeating the abuser's lie and the abuser's gaslighting. So there's a lot of reasons why we might find that there hasn't been truth. So what really happened here was she doesn't want to go, but she's going to be the supportive wife and she's going to go ahead. Well, but there's this little thing about cancer that she has. Just a minor issue about maybe it being a good idea not to go. She's also hoping that somewhere in the vetting process, someone is going to see that their marriage isn't right, and someone's going to confront their husband. And rather than hearing that call for help, this pastor instead sees it as a deception. That is profoundly problematic. So he's also leaving out that in this application, she has to say what David wants for his future, for his mission, for his things. She's got to support that. If she doesn't support that, her life gets even more miserable. It's why you can't help this kind of situation when they're together. You're never going to get a good answer when an abuse victim and an abuser are together in the same room. You can't get a good answer because it's not safe to get good, honest answers. Never counsel a victim in the presence of their abuser. It is a horrible idea and should never be done. He continues, further, my concern now is that Eileen seems to be going to great lengths to impress upon the children the concern they should have about all this, and is thus influencing the children to be fearful of David, which is extremely harmful to the children. Where does this concern come from? How does he draw this conclusion? Has Eileen said it, that I'm convincing the kids? No, David has said that. David says, my wife is speaking to the children. My wife is blowing this out of proportion. My wife is exaggerating. My wife is a liar. He's painted this picture, and Pastor Hardy has believed it. He's believed the lie. But he should have some bells going off, alarm bells going off in his mind. Children who are genuinely fearful behave differently than people who have been manufactured. When you look at what this man wrote on a piece of paper about what he did to his children, it's no wonder they're afraid of him. But Pastor Hardy didn't want to see it. He didn't want his opinion and his judgment to be influenced. He wanted to get the straight dirt. He wanted to hear it from his own lips. He wanted to trust his own judgment, which is the number one error that pastors make when dealing with abuse. They trust their own ability to spot the lies, their own ability to know who is telling you the truth. And when you do that, your questioning confirms your bias. Your assessments are going to be skewed in the direction of the one you find most believable. And inevitably, the abuser is going to be the most believable of the two, especially when they're in the same room. So we don't have any basis for why Pastor Hardy has concluded this. And it appears to be that he's heard it from David. He probably didn't hear this firsthand. I can't imagine that Eileen would have said this firsthand. Although it's possible that she said that. I don't believe it. We don't have any indication that the counselor had a direct interaction with the children about this. So the children complaining, hey, mom's trying to turn us against dad, which means we have an accusation by this pastor who has now amplified the abuser's accusation. We see this all the time. When you repeat an accusation without confirmation, without knowledge, you have now given an amplifying voice to the abuser. Is he speaking the truth? Well, there are cases where one parent does try to influence the children against the other parent. There are those kinds of things. In fact, that's what abusers do all the time. But in so doing, one of the problems that we've got is we take up an offense, but we amplify it. A pastor's word in the court, this pastor's testimony, a sworn affidavit sent to the court, carries weight. But more than that, it carries weight because pastors are believed to be truthful, which means we've got to stand so tightly on the truth that we do not allow our own opinions, our own judgment to be elevated to the place of fact. That is absolutely uncalled for. It's one of those times frequently we'll get someone who will call and say, can you come and testify? So I can testify generally about it, what is generally true, but about someone's case, unless I have direct personal knowledge, I will never testify. In other words, I can only testify to what you have told me. I can only testify to what my eyes have seen and my ears have heard. I can give you an argument as to why I've concluded based upon these things, but I am never going to amplify someone else's statements as if it's true, unless I have observed it to actually be true. We as pastors must be more disciplined in the way we approach these things, because if we're not, we risk amplifying a lie, which means we now are participating in the lie. He continues, when Eileen approached the church for help last summer, she already had a restraining order. Stop. She has a restraining order. Those are not necessarily easy to get sometimes. I mean, some courts will give them out more than others. But the truth is that a restraining order that is sustained generally has to have some manner of proof that informs the court that there is a risk to that person. They're just not thrown out like candy. So she has a restraining order. You should be thinking, wait, what's going on? And was accusing him of abusing the children. Okay, so now she has a restraining order. She's protecting the children. She was very upset when she called and was implying that David would be a threat. You hear implication, accusation, assumption, intimation. He is putting very emotionally laden words of doubt on his assessment of her, but literally saying nothing regarding his evaluation of David. She was very upset, and when she called and was implying that David would be a threat to both the children and her once he was informed of the restraining order. So the restraining order is granted, and the church is being told of this, and rather than accept that, the church is now going to do its own investigation and figure out who's telling the truth. This is a gigantic problem. The first is the church is not in a position to conduct an investigation with any kind of clarity because, as we've mentioned, pastors are not generally taught even how to engage in a questioning that doesn't itself undermine the case. And so that kind of an investigation is really going to go something like, dear abuser, do you abuse? And the abuser is going to say, well, no, I don't abuse. And dear victim, do you feel abused? Well, yes, I do feel abused. Have you ever exaggerated in your life? Well, yes, I have exaggerated in my life. Is it possible that you could be exaggerating the abuse? I suppose it's remotely possible, but in maybe one or two steps, see, no, but wait a minute, I'm not exaggerating in this. Oh, no, I don't know that. I'm just a neutral party in this. I don't know which of you is telling the truth. And so in the process of doing that and that kind of exchange, it is set up for the victim to lose and the abuser to win. That kind of dynamic is inevitably going to undermine the victim. So she's upset. That's understandable. Her children are being abused. Now, prior to some of all of this, the extent of his abuse was not yet known. And so the church took up this case on the basis of less information than what we actually have after the fact. But the truth is that even at this point, we can already raise a red flag and say this couple needs to be separated. They should not be counseled together. So he says, this was shocking to us. It's shocking. As David had always seemed to be a fairly laid back and quiet person. He had been teaching in our Christian school without any indications such as she was describing. Nevertheless, we took everything Eileen told us at face value and agreed to treat the situation very seriously. Well, if you treat it very seriously, Are you treating it very seriously because you believe? Or are you treating it very seriously because you don't want to be caught in disbelief? So they don't believe it, or this pastor doesn't believe it, believes David, but is going to treat it very seriously. Okay. A few days later, on a Sunday, we met with David to confront him with the allegations. Why? I don't know why. They don't say. They're going to confront him. And to inform him of the restraining order Eileen had obtained. So they get her to safety. That's good. That's the right thing to do. They've been separated. That's good. And now they're going to inform him of what's happened. While we met, Eileen went to her home under escort by our church security to get everything she and the children would need for a few days. Side note, this is going to take a lot longer than a few days. If you think you can solve this problem, even if it's a minor problem, in a few days, you don't understand the nature of abuse. This is not going to be solved in a few days. This is going to take 6 months to a year if everything goes perfect. If he responds with humility and kindness and contrition and genuine repentance from day one and follows through with everything he's told, you're still 6 months to a year minimum before this is going to be able to be addressed with any kind of effectiveness. A few days later, on a Sunday, we met with David to confront him about the allegations, to inform him of the restraining order Eileen had obtained. While we met, Eileen went to her home. This was to allow their safekeeping with friends until David was served with the order and subsequently made to leave the home. 2 days later, David was served the order and Eileen and the children returned home. So by initiating this interview with David, they've done a couple things. The first thing they've done is they have tipped him off that any criminal behavior is being investigated. They have literally tainted any possibility that this case is going to be effectively prosecuted. They've made it harder on both the prosecutors and the investigators, because now if there's anything on computers, it gets deleted. If there's any evidence whatsoever, it has been undermined. And so the case has effectively been muted. And later on, when the church says, hey, you need to prosecute this, in a court of law, we're not a court of law, so we can't decide who's true. And so we push it off on the law when it's convenient, but we take it back to ourselves when it's not. This is a very common thing that churches do, and it is terribly destructive. So procedurally, it's really a bad idea. But once Eileen was safely away from David, the church should have filed a report that there was suspected child abuse, which I don't see an indication that they did that. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I haven't seen anything that says they did. But it seems clear that the church didn't take the accusation seriously. And so it is doubtful that they acted upon things they didn't believe. And so their behavior, even at the beginning, demonstrates that they have already put her on the likely telling a fib side of things, rather than actually believing that this is a genuine problem that needs to be addressed, and leaving the investigation to people who actually do this. When informed, he continues, when informed of Eileen's actions and her accusations against him, David was visibly shocked. Oh my. He had no prior indication from Eileen that something like this was on the horizon, and was therefore confused as to her accusations and reasoning. So you mean to tell me that this man, who for years has been abusing and mistreating his wife, his children are afraid of him, she's afraid of him, he has zero understanding that there's something amiss? Zero, really. That strains credibility. How do we believe that? How does a pastor actually believe that shock, that zero awareness is even possible. But let's suppose it's true. Let's suppose he actually has zero understanding. What does that tell you about a man who is so out of touch that his wife is ready to abandon him and he has no idea? Is it possible that a woman would be sneaking off and doing her own thing and finding another person and then come in and in an evil, underhanded way make these accusations to get rid of him and keep the kids because she's evil and vicious? Sure, but why? What is to be gained in that? She's already able to do it. What is to be gained by making this accusation and being subjected to this scrutiny? It strains credibility at this point for him to have believed this visibly shocked David. No prior indication from Eileen. I can't believe she never once. I have not talked to Eileen. I don't know. It's one of the reasons why we can comment on this. Is some cases we can't comment on because we're involved in. We don't comment on any cases that we're involved in. So we can eliminate any speculation if we were involved in this because it wasn't one of our cases. And so I don't know. I don't know if Eileen didn't ever tell him that she was unhappy or that she was concerned, but I doubt it. Most of the victims that we've talked to have voiced some manner of concern. That he would completely miss it. Would that shock me? No, because he thinks everything's fine. She's under control. So we can test Pastor Hardy's conclusions by simply granting all the things he has asserted as believable. So according to Hardy, David is married to a woman that is so unhappy in their marriage that she is willing and able to ask for, falsely obtain a protection order. She's so deceptive that she can put on a convincing act regarding fear, manipulate the children to be afraid as well. All of this is done simply so she can be happier and healthier without David. And David is completely oblivious to and confused by his wife's deceptive and manipulative character. As far as he knows, everything was just fine. How can this be true? It strains credibility. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible, but not very likely. Moreover, this is a man that you have in ministry. If he has so little discernment as to be so grossly unaware of his own home, then how is he going to be leading in the church? Pastor Hardy continues. These events were the beginning of my counseling relationship with the Grays for several months. I first began meeting with Eileen to gather more information about what she claimed had happened and to encourage her in the midst of the difficult circumstances she stated she was in. Eileen was very willing to tell anything and everything about their family life. In more than one meeting or phone call, she discussed their 19 years of marriage, the mistakes they had both made in parenting, their past church involvements, etc. Basically, Eileen presented a very dark picture of many years of misery being married to David. Okay. What about him? What did he present? In this letter, we don't find any presentation of this kind of response from David. What did he present about what it was? What was his story? We don't get that. Pastor Hardy wants us to get his conclusion, and he's only going to state her side and his assessment of her side in order to bolster the conclusion he wants the court to come to. This is another pastoral malpractice. You need to give an accurate picture of what is actually happening so that the court, with all of the information, can make a just decision. You are not an investigator trying to advise the court how they should conclude and decide on the matter. So what has happened is the pastor has taken his own limited experience with David He seems like a laid back kind of guy. I can't imagine that all of this dark stuff would be true about him. If we had a nickel for every person who said, oh, they could never do that, that person could never mistreat his family like that, that person would never do such an evil thing. He seemed like such a nice guy. We could fund our ministry indefinitely. We wouldn't have to worry about funding the refuge. We wouldn't have to worry about anything financially. A nickel for every person that would say that abuser would never do it. We would be flush with funds. He continues. This was all very shocking to me due to what I had observed in the years that I had known them. One confusing part of the story was David and Eileen's desire to move to Vietnam. For a long time, our church had been preparing to send the Grays there as missionaries. Eileen had conveyed to us her strong desire to do this with David, and had even written a letter to other ladies in the church about her excitement. Well, sure, she's trying to make the best of what David's vision is. She's trying to be the dutiful wife. She's trying to be submissive, like she's being told. She's trying to go along with it in hopes that maybe something will get better. Now, in our meeting, she was telling me that this was a lie on her part and that she did not intend to go to Vietnam. Never mind, he does not include the part that in the middle of this, she got cancer. Now, at this point in reading this letter, knowing that little piece in there, I'm left wondering why in the world is such important data being left out of the narrative that Pastor Hardy is telling. I don't have a good answer for him. To put him in the best possible light is getting harder and harder for me as I read. She explained that she was keeping this appearance up, waiting for someone to discern what was going on in their family and then hoping that we would refuse to let them go. Well, yes, you should absolutely vet your missionaries. You should absolutely know that they're not mistreating their wives. You should absolutely be looking into their lives before you send them to be isolated on a foreign field so that these kinds of things are even harder to detect. So for those of you who might not know, we spend a good bit of our time helping in abuse cases that are related to ministry, missionaries, evangelists, pastors' wives. That's 80% of our clients. We specialize in those high-profile kinds of relationships where public image and news cycles and those kinds of things are having a bunch to bear. But one of the worst forms of isolation known to man is the mission field. And when you put an abuser and their victim on the mission field, you have basically created a hothouse where getting a victim to safety is very, very hard. You should be vetting that thoroughly. The fact that she was trusting them to do that was good. They fell down on this job. They did not do her justice. Counselor is confused because he is holding up his own judgment and experience with the abuser against the victims, as if he has a better view of her experience than she does. He is literally believing the lie and calling her the liar. Once you take up a position to amplify the lie, you have joined arms with Satan. You are no longer acting in the capacity of a minister of the gospel. Though you may believe it to be true, though you may be doing it in a good heart, though you may be deceived, though you may be standing in all honesty before God, doing right, you still are aiding Satan. You are not aiding the gospel. He continues. As I continued discussing issues with Eileen, my concern began to grow about her thinking. At times, she would seem to greatly exaggerate issues. I explained that she was making great leaps when creating conclusions based upon various events that had happened. Eventually, Eileen admitted to me that this is her tendency. Now we've got it. Now we see. Here it is. He teaches her that she has concluded in error, that she has jumped to conclusions that contradict his jumping to conclusions. Her conclusions were right. She was telling the truth. And this pastor sided with a lie based upon his own leaps of conclusion and leaps of judgment, and then accused a victim who has lived with this abuser and accused her of drawing conclusions that were unwarranted from a limited set of data. But she was right. And by amplifying the lie, he put on record in court as a minister of the gospel a lie. You can't pass that off. You can't skip it and say, oh, I didn't know. You sided against the truth. You have to own that. Even if you were wrong, even if you were misjudged, even if you made a mistake, you have to own that. You can't sweep it aside and say, oh, I couldn't have known, because anyone with even a modicum of training would have known not to do this. Eventually, after being coerced and prodded and backed into a corner by the counselor, Eileen admitted to me that this is her tendency, to jump to conclusions. He continues, once I began to meet with both Eileen and David together, this tendency continued to display itself. After several counseling sessions with both of them, I began to address Eileen's faulty logic and irrational thinking as part of the counseling session. So now, in front of the abuser, he lays out the abuser's now argument in his favor, his logical argument leading to his defense, his ability to say, I did nothing wrong, his ability to say it's all blown out of proportion, his ability to say it's exaggerated. Now the abuser's lie has had its effect on the counselor, and the counselor's support of the lie has now been brought into a full fruition and given the abuser their own argument. He writes, this was very offensive to Eileen, and she became visibly upset with me for doing so. Well, yeah, no duh, Sherlock. How could she not be visibly upset? I'm visibly upset, and I'm reading this for the upteenth time. Again, he's making a mistake counseling them together at all. But in doing this, he is not helping Eileen. He is actively helping David. The real problem, it appears to me that Pastor Hardy is very offended that Eileen is not following his direction and lead. That Pastor Hardy's judgment is not being heard by Eileen, but Eileen is telling the truth, and Pastor Hardy has believed the lie. Rather than doubting himself, rather than having the humility to say, maybe I've missed something here. Wow, that was a bigger reaction than I expected. Instead, he doubles down. Exaggeration. David's not really that bad. The truth is, he was worse. In my meetings with the Grays as a couple, I confronted David on every issue that Eileen had concerns about. What was his response? How was he taking action to deal with it? What were those issues? The court is not being told. He is willing to throw Eileen under the bus, but he's not willing to give any information with respect to the abuser. As time went on, here's why. It became very apparent that the real issues were not David's parenting skills or lack thereof. Eileen was a woman very disappointed in their marriage. Duh. Imagine marrying a man you thought was a godly man. Imagine marrying him thinking that this was going to be a wonderful experience and mimicking the glory of Christ and the love of Christ for his church and reflecting all of the gospel in their marriage, their relationship, and their children. Imagine that turning into a destructive, damaging, living with a wolf instead of a sheep, living with a satanic messenger, hurting, crushing, abusing, brutal by his own admission. How could she not be disappointed? But this disappointment is also a minimization, because she's way more than disappointed. She's terrified. She's protecting her children. This is not disappointed. I surmised that this was definitely what was driving Eileen. So his conclusion was her disappointment with David as a husband was driving Eileen, not to protect her children, not because she was afraid of him, not because she had any concerns about him and porn or him and his mistreatment of others. None of that. What's driving it is disappointment. So disappointment leads to all of these overblown things. Really? David's alleged failure as a father was only the excuse she had been looking for to separate herself from her husband. So she's, for the last upteen years of misery, she's been looking for an excuse. The truth is, she's probably been avoiding the excuse, trying to stay faithful, trying to be the good wife, trying to be the godly woman, trying to follow First Peter and suffer with Christ, and trying to do all those things that she's been told to do, that this man is actually going to continue to tell her to do. Misapplying scripture to her, misapplying what the Bible actually says in order to keep her under the abusive thumb of an agent of Satan in her midst. Here's his assessment of David. Here's some interesting things. David has always been willing to receive counsel on every issue. He has readily admitted his failures, but both as a husband and father, and has been more than willing to change in any way possible. How does he even know that? Has he asked her? Has she seen any change? How would he believe her if he did? He thinks she's a liar and exaggerator. He's taking David's word for it. Eileen continually refused to take him back. When asked to explain her reasoning, she would give very subjective and sometimes illogical proofs of David's lack of sincerity. She doesn't trust him. She shouldn't trust him. His behavior doesn't warrant trust. Why in the world are you asking her to trust him? He's responsible to prove that he's trustworthy. Let's see here. All right, we're almost done with this letter, I think. Maybe not. It's taking a while, longer than I thought. Along the way, during weeks of counseling, our church was providing opportunities for David and Eileen to meet on our campus with the children so that David could interact with them. Lovely. We provided various individuals to monitor these times. At every occurrence, the monitor confirmed that David was no threat to the children, because of course he's going to be having bad behavior while other people are watching. In fact, the children loved being with David and obviously missed seeing him. If you don't understand that they have to behave that way in order to be safe, an abused child has to put on a good face for the abuser. Otherwise, they get mistreated worse. They learn very quickly how to put on the good face. That doesn't mean they're not afraid. After several weeks, therefore, our church concluded that monitors were not necessary. When I conveyed this conclusion to Eileen, along with the fact that we would not be able to make further progress in counseling until she and David were back together, Eileen made the decision to stop attending our church or seeking our counsel. Good for her. This was the best decision for Eileen. Absolutely the right thing to do. If the church will not believe the truth, if the church is going to side with a lie, then you cannot trust that church to handle your case well. You can't. Don't try. Ditch. Well done. Since that time, I believe my observations about Eileen have been further verified. Regardless of David's attempts to prove his love for his family. What attempts? Tell me about some of them. Eileen is pulled further and further away from him. As I've stated, the bottom line in all of this is not as complex as some might think. He's got it simply, he's got it. Eileen doesn't like David, believes she's both happier and healthier without him, and is using what she alleges to happen to leverage to put David out of their lives. My concern now is Eileen seems to be going to great lengths to impress upon the children the concern they should have, and is influencing the children to be fearful of David. Wait, if she's influencing them to be fearful, how come they're not behaving fearful when they're with him? Isn't that a contradiction? In all this, I've never taken the position that David has made no mistakes. Okay, well, what mistakes? Tell us, please. Or that he has no improvement to make. What improvements? Mistakes and improvements. Keep that in mind. At the same time, it must be clear that Eileen's conduct is equally at fault. Equally at fault. Keep that in mind. Because in the end of this, we're going to go there. Both in their parenting and in their marriage, but everything they have each done or not done that has contributed to the demise of their family has answers and can be overcome. I'm just convinced that Eileen does not want David to come back. David's mistreatment of his wife and children characterized as mistakes that need improvement, and Eileen's unwillingness to trust because she has no reason to trust is one of the most egregious forms of sin leveling I've ever seen. His resistance to believing her is profoundly unwise. Then he declares under penalty of perjury that the foregoing is true. A minister of the gospel has before a court of law stated his opinion as truth, and he was wrong. He believed and amplified the lie. There is a need for accountability on that alone. But if you really want to see, what you have to look at is what he wrote about his mistreatment of one of his children. If you're squeamish, this one you might want to just mute. He used the belt and the rod way too harshly, brutally. That's his word, brutally. Too long, too hard, wrong places. What does he mean by that? Head, legs, feet, hands. With his knee on the back. So this man knelt with his knee on the back of his child and beat his child everywhere his knee wasn't. brutally by his admission. He threatened to get rid of her, take her away, send her to juvenile hall, sleep in the garage, adopt her out. He disciplined in anger, put her in a closet and left her there, takes away her favorite toys, is cruel. His words, tied her up, locked her up. And if you really want to be set on edge, if you really want to wonder why this mom is concerned, the last one takes the cake. Should have always been adequately dressed in front of her. If these things do not fire off red flags galore, if these things are not utterly and absolutely terrifyingly obvious, then I don't know what is. But this man, rather than see what he has actually said about his own behavior, this man took that admission, which should be lighting fires, and concluded that she's dissatisfied, disappointed, exaggerating. When I read this, I was dumbstruck. This isn't the only letter we have from Pastor Hardy. This isn't the only thing that we have that reveals all of what goes in. And tomorrow I'm gonna call this a quits. I gave myself an hour. Tomorrow I'm gonna go into that. This man believed a lie. And here's the terrifyingly true part. It was worse than that. And this pastor went to court and swore to speak truthfully and amplified a lie. Simply because he misjudged the abuser and trusted his own judgment. And then, I believe, and looking at the rest, well, we'll look at that tomorrow. If you get anything from any of this, get this one thing. You cannot trust your judgment that you know the lie when you see it. It is much harder to spot than people think. It's much easier to be deceived than people think. And abusers are very good at playing in those areas of ambiguity. They're very good at twisting and mangling what is true so thoroughly that even the victim is confused by the truth. And so the counselor is going to be likewise confused by the truth. And the only one giving anything coherent is going to be the abuser. And so judgment falls with the abuser. And this is one of the main reasons pastors misjudge abuse cases all the time. I wish this was isolated. This is just a public record account of something that we see every week, sometimes daily. Dear pastors, don't trust your own judgment. Don't believe the lie, and never amplify something you do not know is true. At the very minimum, stay skeptical of both. But if you're going to amplify the truth, that's great. Just, you better make sure it's the truth. Because Pastor Hardy, if you get to listen to this at all, you need to repent of putting a lie in the public record and then leading your church to side with the lie. This is not a minor issue. This is a big deal. If when Julie Royce's investigative reporting had come out, if we could have seen humility from the church and from the elders saying we got it wrong, I would not be making these videos. But now we have friends of Grace Church attacking Julie Royce because their hero is being called to account. My friends, this cannot be. This is not righteous. Let God be true and every man a liar. Don't amplify the lie. That's all I got for today. See you tomorrow.